Right, right. Okay. Members, a quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the gallery in the rear of the chambers to please stand. We'll ask Assembly Chaplain Father Papademos to give today's prayer. Yes, you bet.
Good morning. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for working behind the scenes in our life. We trust that the appointed time for us is on its way, and we are content in you, knowing that you have a good plan for our future. We bless your holy name today and always. Amen.
We ask our guests to please remain standing, and Mr. Fletcher will lead us in the pledge today.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have the reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Tuesday, June 30, 2009. Assembly met at 12 a.m. Honorable
Mr. Rico moves and Mr. Blakely seconds that the reading of the previous day's journals be dispensed. Presentation of petitions, there are none. Introductions of reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the Governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Motions and resolutions, Mr. Tirico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to waive the file notice requirements to allow the Utilities and Commerce Committee to meet on Thursday, July 2nd, upon adjournment of session to hear SB 14 by Senator Smidian.
Without objection. Mr. Blakely.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, we oppose this motion, and I respectfully request a roll call vote.
Without objection. Members, Mr. Tirico is requesting to waive file notice requirements to allow Utilities and Commerce Committee to meet on Thursday, July 2nd, upon adjournment of session to hear SB 14 Smidian. Mr. Gaines is asking for a no vote. Mr. Tirico is asking for an aye vote. Clerk will open the roll. Thank you. All those voters are to vote. All those voters are to vote. All those voters are to vote. We need all members on the floor. We need all members on the floor. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 42, noes 25. Rules are suspended. Mr. Tirico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 56 so that the Natural Resources Committee can notice the following bills for hearing on Wednesday, July 8th. SB 14 by Senator Smidian, pending re-referral from the Utilities and Commerce Committee, and SB 32 by Senator Negrete McLeod, pending re-referral from the Utilities and Commerce Committee. I believe the Republicans are going to oppose the motion.
Without objection. Mr. Gaines.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we oppose this motion, and I respectfully request a roll call vote.
Members, Mr. Tirico is asking for an aye vote. Mr. Gaines is asking for a no vote. Clerk will open the roll. All those voters are to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 41, noes 23. Rules are suspended. Mr. Tirico. Very well. Mr. Tirico.
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to allow Mr. Bill Berryhill to have guests on the floor this morning.
Without objection. Members will now recess the regular session for the purpose of convening a third extraordinary session. We'll go back to motions and resolutions. Mr. Tirico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bills 47 through 56 are at the Assembly desk. I request unanimous consent to withdraw Assembly Bills 47 through 56 from the desk and to take them up without reference to file for the purpose of second reading today and to order them to the third reading for Thursday, July 2nd. These measures relate to the budget.
Mr. Gaines.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we oppose this motion and respectfully ask for a roll call vote.
An additional roll call vote, sir? Oh, you're demanding a roll call vote? Very well. Mr. Tirico is asking for an aye vote. Mr. Gaines is asking for a no vote. Clerk will open the roll. All those voters are to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll. Tally votes. Ayes 41, noes 25. Rules are suspended. Third extraordinary session is recessed under clerk's. My apologies. Clerk will read Assembly Bills 47 through 56 for a second time.
Assembly Bill 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, and Assembly Bill 56.
We'll now move to AB 10 for concurrence. Ms. Evans, clerk will read.
Assembly 10 by Assemblymember Evans, an act relating to state budget and making appropriation, therefore.
Ms. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is AB 10. This is the bill that enacted the majority of the cuts in the fiscal year 9-10 budget. It's the centerpiece of our $24 billion budget solution, and it was vetoed by the governor yesterday. The governor continues to tell us that he wants an entire package of solutions addressing the entire deficit faced by the state of California in order to keep our budget package whole. As you know, some of the bills are still pending in the Senate, and in order to keep our budget package whole, we must pass this again and keep it as part of our budget package. I would ask for an aye vote.
Ms. Harkey.
With all due respect, Speaker, I cannot find the bill. What are we talking about here? I don't have it referenced anywhere. I know it's not referenced the file, but where is it?
It's on your laptops under mocked up legislation on the desktop. So you probably want to look at your desktop. And we also will have some handed out as well. Just please review the information on your desktop. Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same point. Just curious what it was we're actually being asked to vote on today, and having not seen today, just a curiosity question as to the ethics of the House conduct and how it actually reviews the bills before it votes on it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gaines.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we would request a delay on the vote of this bill until we've had a chance to analyze it.
It's a pretty thick bill. It was the same bill that was amended in the Senate.
Well, this is the first knowledge we have of the bill. We'd request that you delay it until we have an opportunity to see what's in the bill. Yeah. We'd like just to have due process, run the House as it should be run.
Would you like 5 minutes, Mr. Gaines?
If we could just hold the bill, that'd be great.
I'm sorry? We'll give you 5 minutes to review the bill, Mr. Gaines.
How many pages do we have here? 300?
We'll pass temporarily and come back to that, Mr. Gaines. Members of the House will be back in session. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 10 by Assemblymember Evans, an act relating to the state budget and making an appropriation, therefore.
Ms. Evans.
Okay. Members, I'll be opening again on AB 10. And I want to start by simply trying to clarify the confusion. AB 10 is the same bill, word for word, that we debated at length for hours on Sunday. And it is simply in a different vehicle that had to come over from the Senate. So it is exactly the same bill that the Republican caucus has had in its possession since 6:18 p.m. on Saturday. So there has been ample time to review and study this bill. And in fact, we have debated it at length, as I said, on Sunday. Same exact bill, word for word. A couple of things I do want to mention to put this action in context. Members, our economic situation continues to deteriorate. And you may have heard there are 46 states in the nation whose fiscal year begins on July 1. Of those 46, 10 of us are starting the fiscal year with a budget that is out of balance. 9 other states, 10 including the state of California, are having the same struggle, the same debate in their legislatures as we are having here in the state of California. We are not alone. But as I said, the situation continues to deteriorate. Yesterday, the federal government announced that it may be taking over certain state parks, if in fact we close them, because the conditions under which we purchase those parks from the federal government require us to maintain and keep open those parks. So if we close them, the federal government will take them over. Second, a state court decided, I believe it was yesterday, that the state cannot transfer transit funds to balance its general fund, and that will have to be going up on appeal. Federal courts continue to oversee health care in our state prisons, and a federal judge continues to threaten to release prisoners early due to overcrowding. State employees now, according to the governor this morning, will have 3 furlough days per month. And as you all know, and we're all painfully aware, I believe, the state controller is beginning to issue IOUs tomorrow. And most of those IOUs go to people in this state who are poor and very, very low income. And if the banks do not honor those IOUs, that means about $3 billion will be taken out of our state's economy in the coming weeks. And that's money that would have ordinarily been spent directly in and immediately in local businesses. That's money that's coming out of our economy. So that's the situation, members. Will continue to get worse unless we can put this package as a whole on the governor's desk. He continues to say he will veto it if we don't put a whole package on his desk. This is the centerpiece of our package, and I would ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Nielsen.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, debated some provisions of this the other night. A lot in here is meritorious. They are cuts that Republicans and Democrats have both agreed on. I don't have a problem with that at all, but the bigger problem here today is process. This is an exercise, maybe an exercise, noble one, to show the people that this House is busily at work doing something very meaningful. But we don't know what's going to happen with this. We have no cause to believe that anything different is going to happen than what's happened already. What I would think is more necessary now to show the people of California that this legislature is doing its job is a convening of the Big Five and Big Five discussions on this in thorough depth and agreements thereon. Or the Big Five at least setting the parameters to which they agree. And maybe then empowering the conference committee to reconvene and look at some of this stuff again in light of the new imperatives, another $3 to $4 billion that we have got to deal with as a whole. You know, this may be considered a step, but unless there's some work done in advance to get all parties in agreement, this is just a futile exercise. We don't have time for that now. Rather, we should get the Big Five together and then bring the product of the Big Five deliberations to the floor, something that we have cause to believe the governor would sign, that members of both houses would agree to. And this bill particularly has a poison pill in it that you do not want to take, related to early release, early discharge, indexing criminality in the state of California. What this will result in, ladies and gentlemen, is not thousands, but tens of thousands of your constituents being victimized. And within 6 months, these bodies will be convening hearings. Why did this happen? We didn't want that to happen. Beating up on the Department of Correction, probably rightly so, because they're going to do some of this whether we act or not, unfortunately. There's going to be problems, and you don't want your names behind these provisions alone. That is something, it is not good for your constituents. It is not good for you politically, ladies and gentlemen. I would urge that we just stay off this bill, do not move it along, and do other things that will be more constructive, that offer hope and promise that we can accomplish a budget resolution. This is but a hollow exercise.
Mr. Nilo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very concerned about one provision in this bill that when we debated this and other bills previously, I was under the impression, or in my review, this issue appeared not to be included, but appears now to be included. And we discussed this at conference committee. Those of you that were on the committee will recall that a proposal came forward affecting the deal that had been struck in February relative to public-private partnerships. It was an issue, it is an issue that I've worked on literally since I've been in this body, unsuccessfully, but we were able to include in that budget package, in the interest of pursuing more infrastructure projects using fewer state dollars, most definitely budget-related, and most definitely to the benefit of the taxpayers and infrastructure users of the state of California. This was part of the February budget deal, and I supported that budget because primarily of two things. Number one, the reforms that we achieved, and I actually was the author of the P3 bill in the Assembly. The one that actually passed was the Senate bill, as well as avoiding the cash crunch that we were going to experience in March. Reforms were a very important part. The provision that affects P3s in this bill, as I understand it, basically will make P3s an academic issue. They are forced to go through the CTC for approval and allocation for the P3 form, and in a public setting, that's not going to happen. Why this is being done, I do not know. There was a deal in February. We are modifying that through these budget bills, and this bill in particular, and I view that as going back on a previous agreement. If I am wrong, perhaps the author could address that in her summary, but I would agree with Mr. Nielsen. I recommend a no vote.
Mr. Garrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise with some deep concerns about this bill returning to the floor in its present form. First, I'd like to echo some of the sentiments of my colleague, Mr. Nielsen, as it relates to, there are some good things in this bill, but there are a lot of bad things. They've been identified as poison pills, and other identification has been given to them, maybe not so complimentary. There's one that I spoke to last time the bill appeared before us, and it's the elimination of funding for statewide fingerprint imaging system, which would help to hold back or to stamp out the fraud that takes place in CalWorks, in our non-assisted food stamp programs, and other programs throughout the state. We want to eliminate fraud. We want to take the dollars and provide them to individuals that deserve those dollars, not to individuals that are gaming the system, that are moving from one county to another using false IDs. The fingerprint system is a good, foolproof system. It's proven its value. It's proven its worth over and over again. We use it with our own driver's licenses. We use it on passports. We use it on numerous other things. Its worth shouldn't be questioned, and the elimination of it, I think, will not only short the people that we want to help in programs like CalWorks or food stamps, because others will be taking advantage of that program and using those dollars that could be stretched further for themselves in a selfish and nefarious manner. I urge a no vote.
Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question of the author.
Without objection.
For the author, our analysis says that it attempts to take $1 billion from local redevelopment agencies. Is that in this bill?
No, Mr. Jeffries. The savings are recognized in the bill, but that's actually a separate trailer bill.
Very good. And then, if I may ask, what is the Mexican International Trade Centers? They're getting $15 million.
I believe these are centers that are trade mechanisms between the state of California and the country of Mexico, and I don't believe this is anything new.
Okay, it's my ignorance. I was only able to get to page 300 out of the 500, so I'm a little behind the curve today. On the if I may, there's a provision, and I have not found it in the bill, and maybe the author will know, for the state responsibility, basically the CDF SRA fee. Is that contained in this bill?
Again, the savings are recognized in this bill, but that is the subject of a separate bill.
Okay, so on my own time, members, we have a provision in this bill, and I apologize, I didn't catch it in whatever other bill it was in. That's my fault. Basically, what we're going to have is revenue coming in where the state is now going to levy a tax, okay, maybe a fee, but it's a tax on every home in the SRA area, state responsibility area, protected by CAL FIRE. Previous efforts by the LAO's office to do this was on a parcel charge. CAL FIRE is a wildland firefighting agency as a primary mission unless it is contracted by local government to provide local fire protection services such as structure fires, traffic accidents, and things like that. If we have a fee and we collect a revenue and put it in this bill that levies a charge to protect residential structures in unincorporated communities, we are therefore expanding the mission and responsibility of CAL FIRE to provide a local government service. Now, my friends at CAL FIRE, I would assume, are going to love this, because you will have overnight tripled, quadrupled the responsibility and the mission of CAL FIRE to collect revenues and provide structural fire protection services for every single residence in unincorporated areas that are protected or within SRA lands. You're going to charge the fee to do this and use the revenues in this bill that we're debating here today. And so the state, whether it wants to or not, is going to accept a brand new expanded responsibility for a local government service. And I would assume my firefighter friends are going to love that, because you're going to need a whole lot more staffing and a whole lot more fire engines to take on this new responsibility. So just know that as you vote on this bill, and I, of course, encourage a no vote.
Ms. Skinner.
Mr. Speaker, members, midnight last night, our state's deficit grew by $3 billion. I think many of us were watching with disappointment when the Senate could not act as we did, as we in this House did, urgently to prevent the state from having to issue IOUs and to prevent the continued bleeding. We may not agree on the ultimate path to resolving this deficit. We may not agree on exactly which cuts are going to be the most appropriate, but at least we all agreed that there was no reason to make it worse. The responsibility lies squarely in the governor's hands. We did not have to get to this point. Yes, more discussion is needed to get to the place of ultimate resolution, absolutely. But we did not have to get in the situation where that $3 billion, where that deficit grew by $3 billion. I implore all of us to join together and to appeal to the governor to do the right thing, to respect our state, to respect the people that depend on us. The bill that we have before us right now are cuts, primarily cuts. We all know that we have to make deep cuts to resolve this. We need to do the right thing. The governor needs to do the right thing.
Mr. Logue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Excuse me. What we've got to do in this House is we've got to come to the realization that we've got to basically stop spending, stop bringing bills to this House that increases spending and makes the problem worse than what it is. May 19th, we have a mandate. That mandate was loud and clear. It was a 2/3 vote majority by the people of California, who said basically not only to the people in California, but to the people of the country, that they are fed up with bailouts. They're sick of GM bailouts, they're sick of Chrysler bailouts, and they're sick of bank bailouts. And you know what? They're sick and tired of California bailouts. And if we do not start listening to the public and the will of the public, this will be the first part-time legislator we've had in the last 3 decades. We have got to understand that enough is enough. What we need is a comprehensive $24 billion solution. Majority bills are, in my mind, counterproductive. We've got to create a reform package in this state where yesterday Mr. Perez, Manny Perez, we had hearings as vice chairman, and we listened for 3 hours the jobs and the businesses that are driven out of the state, which is in return driving revenues down to bottom levels. We will never recover as long as this is a state that is hostile to business. We have to reduce the regulations. We have to pass legislation that will put sunset clauses on regulations that are driving businesses out of the state and out of the area. And I personally, as an assemblyman, had to look at businesses yesterday and look them in the face and literally apologize for the way they have been treated in the state of California, because they create wealth, jobs, opportunity, a heck of a lot more than we do as people who work for state government. We owe them an apology, and we need to give it to them because they're the ones that are creating the wealth. They're putting their finances on the line so they can raise all ships around them. So I would like to urge this body to look at legislation and bills that are going to help us get out of this mess. It's going to bring common sense back to California government. Thank you.
Mr. Tirico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I understand, and I think we all know that the governor has made a very successful movie career out of sequels, but this is getting ridiculous. I think if we want to talk about this governor's legacy, let's start with this. Since he entered the stage, we've had an election every year since 2003. That's not normal, folks. He has tried to pass along to the voters his job of governing, and he has failed repeatedly in his attempts to pass the buck to the voters. He has also failed because the budgets that he has presented to us over and over again, as I said Sunday night, are immoral and inhumane and petulant. And, as I said Sunday night, dumb. Because if we were to enact his budget and eliminate healthy families for 1 million kids, and eliminate Cal Grants, and eliminate all of the things he wants to eliminate, we would save a few $1 billion, but we would cost ourselves over $6 billion in federal funds at a time when California cannot afford to cost itself a single dollar in any funds. The power to solve this problem no longer rests in our hands, because here in the Assembly, at least, we acted in a bipartisan manner on 3 bills that solve most of our immediate cash flow crisis. We acted on a majority vote here in the Assembly and sent these bills to the governor. If he wants to move this state forward, all he needs to do is sign the bills. That's the sequel I would like to see. That's the movie I think the governor should be thinking about. Just sign it. Just sign the bills to get ourselves out of trouble and move this state out of this crisis. I'm very glad that some members today wanted to talk about revenues and want to talk about the state of affairs in California and our tax structure. One of the bills that we've debated here over the last several days is an oil severance fee, because we think, at least some of us think, like every other state in the nation, that the oil in our lands belongs to the people of these states and this country, not the oil companies. So they should pay a severance fee.
In reference to the bill, Mr. Tirico.
I just want to note, we wouldn't have to make all of these cuts if we asked, in a spirit of shared sacrifice, which has been very popular to say by the governor and many of us here, maybe we could ask somebody like Exxon, whose profits in 2008 were $45.2 billion, or Chevron, $23.9 billion in 2008. Maybe we can ask them to do a little extra, instead of telling college kids that they don't have Cal Grants, instead of telling 1 million children they won't have health insurance. I was also very surprised to see another study, yet another point of discussion here about our tax structure. I think we all recognize here that working families, and particularly the poor, have been hit the hardest by this recession. Contrary to popular belief, there is in fact a group of people whose income has increased in the last 3 years. The top income earners in California have seen their income increase in 2 years by $64 billion. More than 30% of that amount by the richest 1%. So if we want to talk about shared sacrifice, let's talk about shared sacrifice. Because isn't it time for us to look at the people that benefit the most from our way of life here? Some of you cherish more than anything capitalism. Shouldn't we ask those that benefit the most, our wealthy corporations and the millionaires in California, to give back some of the Bush tax cuts, to pitch in and weigh in on solutions? Because if we did those things, we wouldn't have to make all the cuts that we're talking about. The time is now, Governor, to sign the bills and to move this state forward and get us out of this fiscal mess.
Ms. Harkey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members. I understand that we did a really, I think, an excellent job last week, and we passed 3 bills. They didn't make it, and now we need to start again. But that's where we're at. And I would like to remind this House that putting through a drill like this doesn't really help. The governor and the treasurer, both of which, one a Republican, one a Democrat, have both said before, when I quoted, that we had to reduce our expenses by about $16 billion. We now have to probably reduce them a little bit more. That figure comes from just taking a guesstimate, because our revenues are actually down by 15% from what they were last year. And it's not rocket science, it is dollars. Just dollars. So in order to be back in balance with our budget figures, we need to reduce by about 15% what we were spending, because while our revenues went down this year, we did not reduce our spending. I have another news for all of you. Our revenues are continuing to go down in personal income tax area. Personal income tax is going down and is expected to continue to decline, because we are expecting higher unemployment in California, maybe even to the tune of 14%. That's what I'm hearing. And plus people are earning less. So if personal income tax continues to go down, you will expect to be back here in the fall readjusting the budget again. The budget that we adjusted for our 2-year period in February didn't work. the taxes that we tried to increase didn't increase our revenues. And we are continuing to decline on the revenue side. So all this is fine, and it's great to blame the governor, and it's great to blame the other house or whatever we want to do, but we still have to reduce by 15%, and we will have to reduce more in the fall, I will guarantee you, because I believe the revenue figures are going to continue to go down. As for oil, and we're all talking about oil here, the severance, 10%, I believe it is, and I don't have my resource right here right now, but 10% of our oil is domestic. 90% is from foreign sources. So, you know, why are we beating up on what we call big oil? We don't have that much big oil supplying us. We have foreign, and we have hostile foreign countries supplying us. So let's give our people here locally a break, because we may need them.
1 minute, Ms. Harkey.
Okay, and one more thing. If we can go begging to Washington, D.C. for federal funds to help bail us out, we can ask for some federal waivers for matching funds. If we have to reduce our budget, let's go to the Obama administration and say, okay, we got to reduce ours, but you keep yours at the same level. I mean, you know, that's better than asking for money. So I just have a few suggestions, and I think we need to keep in line that we really do have to reduce our expenses. And what we did in taxes just hasn't seemed to work. So thank you very much.
Mr. Calderon.
Right. Mr. Speaker and members, I'm rising in support of these cuts, but rising also to talk about the greater dilemma that we are in. It isn't simply about making cuts with this governor. We all understand we are going to have to make significant cuts if we're going to get ourselves out of this morass, and then so we can deal with the issue down the line. But the governor has said we can't continue to kick the can down the alley. So instead, he simply wants to kick California in the stomach. When they elected the Terminator, people of California didn't understand that they would be his last victim before he left office. If you take a look at the governor's reforms, they have consistently been rejected by this legislature and the people of the state of California. But he is saying, now that California is hanging in the balance, I want you to adopt my reforms and my reforms only. And I want you to do it without committee hearings, without informed debate. I don't want any transparency, and I don't want any analysis other than the one I provide. Well, if you recall, the first year in office, the governor wanted to reform pensions. The legislature didn't agree. The state public employee unions, firefighters, nurses, and others didn't agree, and he was unsuccessful. So what he did is he said, I'm going to go to the people because they elected this Terminator to terminate government. And he did. We had a costly special election for him to have reforms. What reforms? That he could eliminate the checks and balances of the constitutional form of government by allowing him to make cuts without legislative override, allowing him to ignore statutes without legislative overview, change the way we elect representatives, and interfere with the First Amendment rights of those public employee unions who ultimately defeated him in the legislature. Well, the people had it before him. They had it before him, and they rejected him. In 2005, they rejected him. Recently, he had more reforms on the ballot. And he says, well, the message is loud and clear.
On the bill, Mr. Calderon.
Well, what do you mean on the bill? We talked about oil severance, and everyone got up and said we got to protect the average working person.
On the bill,
if you recall. Well, it is on the bill because These cuts are going to be rejected by the governor because we won't accept his reforms. That's the only reason. But the reforms, for instance, pension reform was rejected. And other reforms have been rejected. So what we need to do is we need to deal with the problem at hand, and we need to then deal long-term with the reforms with input from the public and input from greater minds, even greater minds that exist here in Sacramento. So I know that this is going to go down. I also know everyone in this room is going to vote for these cuts eventually. But it's all about leverage, and the governor said, I can't get all this stuff unless I use California as leverage. So what I'm saying is, if we're going to do reforms under stress, if we're going to do reforms with a gun to our head, then they're not going to be reforms at all. But I ask you to vote for these cuts because they're necessary and it's the appropriate thing to do.
Thank you. Ms. Saldana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, much has been made about the concern over process and arriving at this point. And I think all of us in this chamber acted very honorably and very responsibly a week ago. The vast majority of us voted for a bill that we really believed would help end this impasse. We sent it over to the Senate, and it was at that point where our budget process went off track, and so now here we are, July 1st, no budget. And for people who are watching us from afar, some people have traveled here or watching us even closer, just to review that unlike 47 other states, we require a supermajority for any budget. Whether we increase taxes or not, we need that supermajority to get it approved and move forward. Now, we do actually have a budget. That's one thing that people also are misunderstanding. That budget was passed earlier this year, but because of our ongoing fiscal situation, it needed revisions. And we put forward, this body last week agreed on revisions that would have helped us keep payments going, give us access to the capital markets without our bond rating slipping away, costing even more money for us to then go out and borrow from Wall Street. Every business goes through these cycles. A dozen other states around the country, maybe it's fewer now, but there are several other states that are likewise having a budget situation very similar to ours. A key difference, though, is California is not just any other state. We are in the top 10 global economies. We have 38 million people. We have a budget anywhere from $80 to $100 billion. The two states that are like us, that have a supermajority requirement to get a budget passed, have budgets 1/10 the size of California. So our challenges are extreme. And the people that are up here working away from family, away from friends, are putting every ounce of expertise into addressing this very serious problem. But what happened last night at midnight is that we immediately went deeper into debt. And the question that needs to be asked, and several members have asked it, is why our executive officer is not willing to conserve every dime in the midst of one of the worst economic recessions that not only this country but the world has seen. And a letter that his office is now circulating is attempting to force upon the UC system and the K-12 education systems the very same cutbacks that were proposed and put forward in the budget package that was attempted to be delivered to him. So clearly, it is the process that we're struggling with. But the idea of conserving every dime that we can and avoiding additional costs, that is a consistent message in our legislature. It is not, however, reaching the ears of the executive office. Now, in my district, there were prayer vigils on Monday, interfaith prayer vigils. People of many faiths coming together and praying because, as they see it, the budget is a reflection of our values. And when we talk about cutting health care and cutting education and cutting services to those in the state that are the most needy at a time when people are losing their homes, when we talk about suspending access to higher education, which we know is the ladder upwards for increased income for everyone in this state, When our budget reflects that failure for us to have an agreement, it affects those of us in the state with the least resources. And several other members have already talked about the disparity we're seeing in income levels, how those at the very highest levels of income, including not only individuals but corporations, seem to be doing quite well, those at the bottom really struggling. So I really wanted to speak and lay out some of the clear differences in what California goes through every cycle to reach an agreement on our tens of billions of dollars that we have over time developed. We are the size of a large country, not just a state. We are a leading global driver. And as California struggles and fails to achieve a way to balance these budget cuts, then the whole world will be watching. So I realize what I'm saying to this body has been said many times in committees, in the conference committee. In every committee we hear legislation, but I don't think it's heard often enough. And so the focus and the anger tends to be on us here in the Assembly and across the hall in the Senate. And I just wanted to remind people who may be watching this that it is the process that we responsibly managed a week ago, but it has stalled in another area. So I want to acknowledge the members because in the Assembly, because I think it really was us saying last week, we recognize the extreme risk we are at, we recognize the fiscal situation. Unfortunately, some of our colleagues and the member in the executive office simply did not or failed to recognize that the way that we did over here. So I think that this House has much to be proud of, and we are struggling. We are here today. This is not just a drill. This is not a kabuki dance. This is a very serious debate and discussion of how we go about balancing health care, education, and other issues that matter to every Californian. So thank you for being here and continuing to work on this.
Ms. Evans, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just want to address a couple of points that came up during the debate. First of all, with respect to the public-private partnership issue that was referenced by one of our colleagues, this issue was debated very thoroughly in conference committee. There were two sides of that debate, two different interpretations of the language that we had adopted back in February, two competing views that were debated very thoroughly and in public. And one passed and one did not. The minority was outvoted by the majority. That's how our democratic process works, and that's how it ended up in this bill. And I think there's some confusion reflected from some of the questions that I've been asked and some of the comments from the members. This bill that is before us amends the existing budget, the one that we adopted back in February. So it takes the language from the existing budget and it makes some amendments. There are not new things that were not debated or are not being debated now that were somehow hidden in the amendments. Those were existing in the February budget. And those are sections that are in this bill because in some way, in some manner, they are being amended. Finally, I want to mention there is no expansion in the mission of CAL FIRE. They have the mission that they are required to do. The reality is that when we have a wildfire like we did in Santa Barbara and like we've had in San Diego and in Napa and all over the state, CAL FIRE responds. Local agencies respond, and agencies throughout the state of California respond. So to assess a very small fee on structures within these high fire danger areas simply reflects the reality that the whole state of California has to provide these services. And then finally, I want to mention one thing that I did not mention when I talked about the fact that our state's condition is deteriorating. The fact that the three bill package that this House passed nearly unanimously on a bipartisan vote failed last night in the Senate doesn't mean that we've only lost about $3 billion. We've lost far more like $7 to $8 billion, members, because of the maintenance factor required in Prop 98. The governor this morning has now proposed that we suspend Prop 98 and make up the difference in this coming fiscal year. And the reason this bill is so important is because it is the centerpiece of our overall budget package that is designed to put our current fiscal year's budget back into balance. And we need to pass it. We need to pass it now, and we need the governor's signature immediately. I ask for your aye vote.
All debate having ceased, clerk will open the roll. All those voters are to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll. Tally votes. Ayes 46, noes 26. Senate amendments are in concurrence. We'll now move to AB 19 for concurrence. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 19 by Assemblymember Evans, an act relating to taxation.
Mrs. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 19 is the second bill that was vetoed by the governor yesterday. It is an integral part of our overall budget package. Again, this language is the same language that we debated at length on Sunday and that became available to everybody on this floor on Saturday afternoon. As well as the public. It's been debated and discussed very thoroughly. It's the bill that contains tax accelerations and collection provisions that generate a total of $4.4 billion of revenue solutions. So this is not the tax increases, it's the tax accelerations and collections of existing taxes. So again, it's an integral part of our budget solutions, and I would ask for an aye vote.
Seeing no debate, Mr. Nastandi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to say is when I first got elected to this body, and I know other Democrat, Republican freshmen, we were looking for reforms in state government. And we have not achieved any reforms. We've not even talked about reforms. Apparently, the majority party believes California bureaucracy is a model of efficiency. But I know a lot of us do not think that is true. As a matter of fact, we've actually gone backwards. In the previous bill we talked about, we're almost basically condoning fraud by getting rid of the fingerprinting requirements. So, but getting to this bill, apparently we do have reforms now, reforms in the tax code. So instead of talking about real reforms in government programs, how we cut government programs, how we become more efficient delivering services, how we not go back to the taxpayer and say, give us more money, feed the beast, we're going to reform the tax code so we can increase taxes, so we can expand our tax base. What are we doing here? Let's listen to what the people sent us here for. Let's reform government. Let's draw down government. Let's not go back to them and say, we need more money, we need more taxes. Please vote no on the bill.
Mr. Garrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I want to address a couple sections in our bill that we're speaking to today, AB 19. Section 823 increases personal income tax withholding by 10%. This language changes the dollar amount of wages withheld from an employee's paychecks from the amount equal to 100% of the estimated tax liability to an amount equal to 110%. What are we doing here? We're facing an economically challenging time. People are trying to hold on to their houses, their cars, and we're going to increase the amount of money that we take out of the individual's paychecks from 100% of what they owe to 110%. Listen to that. From 100% to 110%, we're taking more than they even owe. The second part that it gets into here.
Mr. Garrick, are you reading?
Yes, with your permission, I will.
Without objection, sir.
Thank you. The language also increases the withholding rate on bonus payments, overtime payments, commission payments, sales awards, back pay, and certain other types of reimbursement. There are some individuals called salesmen. I think all of us are aware of that. To a certain degree, we're acting as that in our capacity as politicians, selling our point of view. But in this case, we're going to start to withhold extra payments in the form of taxes from salesmen that may be living quarter to quarter and need that cash flow and are dependent upon it. And we are going to, again, increase that from 100% to 110%. There's also one other provision I'd like to address here, and that's the fact that the accelerated personal income tax and corporate income tax estimate payments of the taxable year, that the language increases from 30% due, those are people that file quarterly, to 40% due the June quarter, the second quarter, and increases the April quarter, so that within the first 2 quarters you've already paid 70% of your income tax liability. This is actually unbelievably difficult on families, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and that's where most of our jobs come from. We want to work our way out of this hole that we've dug for ourselves, and by penalizing the free market, small business, and individuals that are out there working and taking more of their money before it's even due, and taking in excess, as I quoted earlier, 100%, moving it to 110% of what is estimated on their paychecks. The last statement I'd like to make relates to some statements that were made relating to, as it regards the last bill, and some general misconceptions. In 2007, 90.8%, listen to this, 90.8% of the taxes were paid by 19.8% of the filers.
1 minute, Mr. Garrick.
Thank you. That means if you flip that around, 80.1% of the filers that filed personal or married couple income taxes paid only 9.1% of the income taxes. With that said, I urge a no vote.
Thank you. Mr. Logue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to read.
Without objection, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just reading this bill, and I'm just astounded at the direction that we're going in. Mr. Nastandi had it right. We're talking about reforming business, but I don't think this is the reform intention that we really had in mind. We're trying to keep businesses from leaving the state, and it looks like the more bills that we face is the more businesses are going to keep on exiting. Let me read this, if you will. Permits the suspension of a person's occupation or professional license if the Franchise Tax Board determines that the person owes unpaid taxes. That's really going to encourage people to get into private sector. Number 2, expands the sales tax by altering the definition of those who are required to collect sales tax so that it will impact the internet retail sales to Californians. There's another score for more taxes. Number 3, requires most businesses to register with the Board of Equalization and report and pay use taxes from the previous year. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're creating in California is a scenario where basically it's gotcha government. You know, I think California government is becoming a government where we should have a Jessica's Law, where we got to quit stalking business because it's absolutely out of control, and these businesses are not going to take it. There's a book written called Atlas Shrugged, and you know what the author of the book stated? It was very interesting. She said she was raised in a nation that was basically government-driven, and her words were this, is that what they did was they created so many laws that they made criminals out of everybody. And that was the goals. And that's what we're doing right now. We're creating so many laws that the average wage earner and the average business in this state will either survive or be fined and driven out of business or put in jail. We've got to get back to government. Mr. De Leon, did you want to say something here? We've got to get back to government that is based upon trust. You know what? Remember the words, we the people? Well, we're at the words of we the people in the California Constitution. It's throughout the Constitution. And we are changing the definition of government as we sit here today. That we have turned the citizens of California into basically people who are being chased, and our state government has become a government of predators. I urge you to vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for the record, members, if members are desirous of speaking, they'll address that to the Speaker. Members do not grant other members on the floor the opportunity to speak, Mr. Logue. Thank you. Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As this body moves forward with its, I guess what we would call the California Full Unemployment Act, efforts, there's a provision in this bill that, and let me say this. I get that we're going to demonize the private sector. I get that we're going to try and attack businesses. I get that we're going to try and move people off of the private sector roles and into the government employment. I get all that the majority party wants to go there. I understand that. I don't subscribe to that. I'm of the opinion that we are going to continue down this path of absolute destruction of the private sector until we can get everybody on the government payroll. Part of that effort today that we're going to see is the provision for the withholding. Now, if you're a small business owner and we're going to take 3% of your earnings, we could wipe people out. Now, if the majority party wants to go after the huge corporations and say we want 3% more, whatever works for you, I don't agree with it, but you are going to vote today to help devastate small businesses who can't afford a 3% loss of their profit. We're talking gardeners here who just take care of lawns for businesses. We're talking sweepers who come through parking lots. We're talking painters who come out and paint over graffiti. We're talking small contractors, electricians who come in and repair lights in parking lots. We're talking people who cannot afford this. We're talking people who do in salons, do nails and hair and stuff like that, who work in somebody else's business but as an independent contractor. We're taking 3% of the income of small business people. So if the majority party wants to continue with the destruction, go right ahead. But it is not going to generate the revenue that we need to pay for all the important safety social networks that we need to preserve and protect our young kids and our elderly who can't help themselves. You cannot sustain the spending levels we're at if you're going to kill the private sector. You can't have it both ways. If you want to provide a safety net for those who need the help, you have to provide an environment that the private sector can employ people and put people to work. And what we are doing here today does not help that. I urge a no vote.
Ms. Saldana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will be referring to notes. I'll avoid reading them verbatim because I think it is important that we read the bill that we're voting on here. And the people that we're looking at collecting these receipts from, or the businesses, I should say. I recognize people create the business. But we're really looking at receipts of more than $100,000. Now, I realize in 2009, $100,000 doesn't go as far as it used to. But we're not really aiming at the lowest income people in California, or the lowest, the smallest businesses. I think we've tried to come up with a number that is not going to be too onerous. And $100,000 in receipts, I think that you're doing fairly well, but I don't think that you would be disproportionately hurt. I've heard several comments about dealing with fraud and abuse, and I'm co-authoring, and I think many other people on this floor have introduced, bills that deal with fraud and abuse, and including bipartisan supports. I'm a co-author with some Republican members on bills that will ensure that people who take advantage of the system, for example, IHSS providers, if they fraudulently report the work that they are doing, they will have an increased penalty. We want to discourage that. We want to make sure that the money that goes into our safety net is used for the safety net and that people are not abusing that. But I think it is just a very small amount of what we're really dealing with here. And when we look at the tax amnesty program that was in effect several years ago, it was introduced by then Assembly Member Judy Chu. She's now on the Board of Equalization. And basically, for a period, we told anyone who owed taxes for whatever reasons, pay your taxes. We will ignore any penalties, any outstanding penalties on those taxes that for whatever reason you think you owe, just pay them. And we will give back any that are found to be in excess. If you appeal an overpayment, we'll deal with that. The state brought in, as a result of that tax amnesty program, over $7 billion in 1 year. And a few billion of that wound up going back to the people who paid because it was, in fact, determined to be not owed. But the point that's important to recognize when we talk about fraud, waste, and abuse is, yes, there is a potential for that to go on. But to deal with that when the house is burning down is not the time to focus on that. What we're seeing here is by ignoring the fairly minimal step-by-step approaches to dealing with more revenues, to dealing with taxing out-of-state vendors. We built the internet largely here in Silicon Valley in California. Now people use it to buy things and not pay sales tax in California. To collect the state's fair share of sales tax, I think, is a reasonable thing to do. And I think many people in California would not mind paying sales tax on an item, just like they do when they go to a store, if they know it's going to, again, go to something that they believe in. No one said it yet today, but often when I talk to people, I'll hear them say, you know, I know what to do with my money more than the government. And I always acknowledge, yes, we know what's best to do with our money. But I just don't see a lot of people building highways these days, or hospitals, or investing in new college campuses and universities. So as much as we would like to leave more money in people's pockets at the end of the day, collectively our state looks the way it looks because we have invested that in roads and transportation, in schools, in health care. So I just wanted to, again, more for the people watching this at home. We are dealing with reforms at a time when the house is burning around us, and we need to put the fires out. We need to look for ways to get some revenues coming in. If this fire continues, we will be closing schools, we'll be closing classrooms, we'll be doing things that none of us want to do. And I know Ms. Evans will ultimately conclude on this bill and make some final points, but I really do believe that this is a reasonable approach to this. And those of us who disagree, we need to do it in a way without being quite so upset and angry about it. We're all in difficult situations. We're trying to come up with a process through our conference committee that makes sense. So I'd like members to please keep that in mind as this bill comes up for a vote.
Ms. Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Now really is the time to find common ground. I think that we can all agree that we have a very serious budget crisis. The children, the elderly, the sick, the needy, they will all be disproportionately affected by our inaction. And I think that we can all agree that there are only a few options for us all to take and to solve this budget crisis. We can increase taxes. We can do across-the-board cuts. We can prioritize our cuts. We can do some more counting gimmicks, or we could improve the business climate and grow the economy. Members, we can increase taxes on our families, but we know that they are already having a hard time making ends meet. We each have those stories from folks in our districts, and more tax increases to them will be devastating. And we can increase tax on businesses. However, that will only send those businesses away, and we will lose jobs, which will only grow our unemployment and increase government dependence. And we can treat all budget items equally with across-the-board cuts, but we know that all budget spending is not equal in priority and that we should not treat them that way. We can use accounting gimmicks. We can move to delay our fiscal problem for another year, maybe two. But it is detrimental to our fiscal stability to assume an overly rosy economy. But what we most certainly need to do is to create jobs. That is the one and only way to get us out of this fiscal mess, to fix California's economy, to generate the type of revenue that is needed to care for our seniors, to care for the disabled, to care for our school children. If we have a strong economy, we are able to fully fund our priorities. Let us join together today. Let us be resolved to make sure that every Californian who wants a job can get a job. Let's be resolved to expand businesses here in California, not in Nevada, not in Arizona. Let us be resolved to find real reforms to prevent future legislators from having to endure these types of cuts and these types of hard decisions. Members, now is the time to find common ground. But this bill is simply not it. I urge your no vote.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, I rarely rise to speak and will probably not be as eloquent as the immediate previous speaker, but I'm not reading from a script. I just want to say a couple of things. I've heard a very interesting dialogue from two of our Republican colleagues over the past few days. In fact, I find it so interesting that they actually are starting to sound more like what we sound like when we stand up and speak on this floor, to speak on behalf of those who are the most vulnerable in California. But you know, this is not an either-or situation here. You know, I like to believe in the yin and yang of the representative process. You can't have a strong economy without a strong workforce. And you cannot ask people to give more unless we provide more opportunities to give. The bill before us seeks to accelerate tax revenue that would already be collected. It's not new. It's just a different way for us to begin to address the common ground that my colleague from the other side just spoke to. And I think that if we really are working together in a spirit of bipartisan cooperation, then instead of being the party of no, my colleagues on the other side should be the party of go. Let's go and make sure that California, that we know is already going over the brink, doesn't further slide into the abyss. You know, members, all of us here, the 80 of us here that are privileged to represent our districts, sit here and debate in the comfort and convenience in this air-conditioned chamber. But July 1 for millions of Californians spells disaster, because we have not acted and we do not have a chief executive officer that is willing to partner with us to solve California's problems. I urge today an aye vote in the spirit of bipartisan cooperation so that we can begin the long, hard road to restore trust, confidence, and belief in government, that government can work and does have an appropriate place in our society. It's not just private enterprise, and it's not just public. It's a combination of both. Let's go forward in a spirit of bipartisan cooperation. I urge an aye vote.
Mr. Anderson.
Question of the author.
Without objection.
We talked about, or I heard earlier, testimony or conversation on the fact that the threshold's $100,000. Is that threshold for the withholding, does it take in consideration how many employees of that sole proprietor?
I think it's a simply $100,000 threshold, and I believe this was the governor's proposal.
So if they had, say, 10 employees, the $100,000 is really $10,000 per person. So the threshold, although it's all $100,000, it doesn't really mean much when you're weighing it. I mean, I'm saying it, but I'm going to ask it in a question.
Yeah, is this a question?
Yeah.
I can do the math just as well as you can.
I'm getting there, but it strikes me that it doesn't take in consideration the number of employees. So saying that there's a threshold of $100,000 is somewhat meaningless. If I'm a sole proprietor with me as the only employee, that would be $100,000 for me. But if I had 10 employees, that'd be less than $10,000 per person. And was there any thought to addressing that issue in this bill?
Again, this was a proposal from the governor, so you'd have to address that to the administration.
Thank you. On my own time. You know, it's interesting. I have a bunch of college friends that like to go to Vegas. And their motto is, nobody leaves until we've all lost our money. And unfortunately, I'm fearful that California's new model is, we're not going to stop punishing employers till every job leaves California. For that reason, I urge a no vote.
Ms. Evans, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we have an unprecedented number of red herrings swimming around the chamber here today. This bill doesn't raise taxes. It doesn't increase any individual's tax liability. What we did in this bill was we adopted a number of the governor's proposals with respect to accelerations and withholding. And then we added a few more provisions that strengthen laws against abusive tax shelters and goes after tax cheats. It doesn't raise anybody's taxes. It doesn't add any new tax revenues. But it does better enforce existing tax laws. And for that reason, I would ask for your aye vote.
All debate having ended, Clerk will open the roll. All those voters are to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll. Tally of votes. Ayes 44, noes 29. Senate amendments are concurred in. Members, the third extraordinary session is recessed under the call of the Speaker. We're back in regular session. We'll now move to the second reading. The clerk will read.
Assembly Joint Resolution 16 with amendments Senate Bill 817, 515, 636, 633, 124, 201, 728, 294 with amendments, 202 with amendments, 306, 629, 635, 722, 285 with amendments, 407 with amendments, 95 with amendments, and Senate Bill 626 with amendments.
Mr. Tirico, under motions and resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to immediately withdraw the following bills from the Governor's desk and to hold the measures in Assembly engrossing and enrolling until ordered returned to the Governor. Listed as follows: AB 62 by Mr. Portantino, AB 63 by Mr. Mendoza, AB 81 by Ms. Strickland, AB 83 by Mr. Fuhrer, AB 158 by Mr. Mendoza, AB 170 by Mr. Mendoza, AB 176 by Mr. Silva, AB 258 by Ms. Ma, AB 285 by Mr. Tran, AB 332 by Mr. Fuentes, AB 348 by Ms. Salas, AB 401 by Mr. Ruskin, AB 409 by Mr. Garrick, AB 459 by Mr. Lowenthal, by Ms. Lowenthal, AB 863 by Mr. Niello, AB 940 by the Committee on Judiciary, AB 991 by Mr. Silva, AB 1090 by Mr. Monning, AB 1149 by Mr. Davis, AB 1164 by Mr. Tran, AB 1286 by Ms. Huber, AB 1293 by Mr. Hall, AB 1441 by the Committee on Agriculture, and finally AB 59 by the Committee on Banking and Finance. There will be an objection to that motion, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Gaines.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, we oppose this motion and respectfully request a roll call vote. Thank you.
Mr. Tirico is requesting an aye vote. Mr. Gaines is objecting, requesting a no vote. It takes a second by Mr. Krikorian. It takes a majority of those voting, majority of those present, and vote. Clerk will open the roll. All those voters are to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the votes. Ayes 47, noes 25. Motion passes. Mr. Tirico.
Final motion, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 56 to notice the following bills for hearing in the Higher Education Committee on Tuesday, July 7th. SB 248 by Senator Oropeza, pending re-referral from the Education Committee. SB 747, Senator Romero, pending re-referral from the Education Committee. And SB 815 by Senator Cogdell, pending re-referral from the Veterans Affairs Committee.
Without objection. Mr. Tirico.
Mr. Speaker, for members of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, please convene in the Rules Committee room immediately for purpose of establishing a quorum and for voting on the measures presented earlier today. Immediately. in the Rules Committee room, all members of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee.
So noted. Thank you, sir. Ms. Brownlee, for what purpose do you rise?
I just wanted to make an announcement about...
Without objection.
Thank you. The Assembly Education hearing will begin in room 4202, 15 minutes after adjournment. I ask that everybody be on time. Thank you.
So noted. Clerk will note. Mr. Tirico.
Mr. Speaker, at the request of the authors, please remove file item, file SCR 14 and SB 817 by the Senate Elections Committee from the consent calendar, and then place it on the inactive file. SB 817 by the Senate Elections Committee.
Clerk will note. Members will now move to the consent calendar. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 39 by Senator Benoit and others, an act relating to personal liability and declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Does any member wish or desires to remove an item from the consent calendar? Clerk has already read the consent calendar. Clerk will open the roll. All those voters desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 75, noes 0. On the urgency, ayes 75, noes 0 on the consent calendar.
Senate Bill 544.
Ayes 75, noes 0.
And Senate Bill 119.
Ayes 75, noes 0. Mr. Tirico. Mr. Tirico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By purpose of announcement, members of the Governmental Organization Committee will convene. The Governmental Organization Committee will convene immediately upon recess in a few moments in room 4202.
Clerk will note. Yeah. Ms. Brownlee, for what purpose do you wish to be recognized?
I'd like to correct my last announcement. The Education Committee will be convened 15 minutes after adjournment in room 123.
Clerk will note.
Or, excuse me, 126.
Clerk will note. Ms. Galgiani, for what purpose?
The Committee on Agriculture will be meeting 15 minutes after the adjournment of session in room 126.
Clerk will note. Ms. Galgiani, can you repeat? Members, we have not recessed yet. Ms. Galgiani, can you please repeat the location of that
Yes,
hearing?
room 126.
Room 126. Education will be in room 4202. Ms. Brownlee, education will be in room 4202. GO will be in room 437. Members, the House will stand in recess upon call of the Speaker.